From Tally to Cali,
It's time
to wake up.
Wake up! Wake up! Warchant.com is your ultimate Seminole sports source.
and this is Wake Up Warchant, presented by Zaxby's
Now here's Warchant.com's Aslan Hajavandi.
and Corey Clark.
Wake up! What's up, everybody? It's Wake Up Warchant, proudly presented by Zaxby's indescribably good Warchant.com. It is your ultimate Seminole sports source. Use that promo code Warchant30, gets you 30 free days of access to the website. Try it, you'll like it. You probably won't leave. Probably. I can't say definitively, but probably won't leave. As has been the case on the program here last few weeks, on Wednesdays, we talk about the old days. Gene Williams and Corey Clark have been sitting down with some former Florida State greats to talk about some former Florida State victories, big-time victories, signature wins, I guess you can say. On today's episode, it's going to be EJ Manuel's signature victory, which was the Triumph 2012 over Clemson inside Doak Campbell Stadium. Let's all take a moment now just to kind of breathe in and remember how great of a night that was. I wasn't even in Tallahassee, but I kind of played hooky from work. I'm like, I got to sit at home and watch this game. And I think I went to Facebook, which might have been like one of the last times I posted on Facebook. And I was just like, all right, we're finally back. Like, for real, for real. You know, the Oklahoma game in 10 obviously was ugly, but to beat Florida, to beat South Carolina in 2010, then 11, you did hang tough with Oklahoma. You had that ugly 3-game losing streak, but you still beat Miami. You beat Florida again, even though it looked hideous. It was still like, all right, we're getting there. I think we're getting there. And then that night, taking down Clemson and Doak, it was like, all right, we're here. Let's do this. Let's start winning championships. But we stopped in Raleigh somewhere along the way, and, bad things happen. But, hey, we're not going to talk about the bad stuff. We're going to talk about the good stuff. And speaking of the good stuff, shout out to my boy, our boy, the guy, the Spiz, as his friends call him. Jimmy Spizzero says, wake up! I can confirm, guys, that the family pack at Zaxby's is nationwide. I live in Prattville, Alabama. My family got 20 tenders, 2 large fries, and 4 pieces of Texas toast for $24.99. Go Noles! So, it's a true thing. Look at that. 20 tenders, 2 large fries, 4 pieces of Texas toast for $24.99 United States dollars in currency. Or you could get a half gallon of sangria for double that cost at an undisclosed restaurant in Tallahassee, but I'm going to let it go. We'll be back Friday, myself and Corey, to take everyone's questions on the Renegade Express, to which I need to actually post the thread. I have not. I'm slacking, but it'll be there by the time you folks hear this. Also, check out Warchant. We argued in written form what's going to happen with the football season. Will it start on time? Will it not? If it doesn't, do you scrap part of it, or do you scrap all of it and just start in winter, the latest season, if you will? So some pretty good insight from Corey, as well as Gene and Ira mainly. I just I brought a nickel to a dime fight, so not a lot for me on that. But you kind of already know where I stand, and really, who cares about my opinion at the end of the day, right? All right, with that said, EJ Manuel sits down with our own Gene Williams and Corey Clark to talk about the 2012 triumph over Clemson in our latest edition of the War Chat. Enjoy!
We're back for another session of War Chant. I should say War Chat. I'm so used to saying War Chant. I've been saying it for 20 years. It's kind of hard to change this spin here. But, yeah, the War Chat with Corey S. Clark, senior writer at warchant.com. And we've done quite a few of these. And we're going to bring it up a little. We went 80s. We've done a couple in the 90s, Corey. So let's jump way ahead to kind of a game we're going to talk about today that was very kind of important, I think, in turning the corner in the early Jimbo Fisher era, and that is the 2012 Florida State-Clemson game at the time. We're going to lay the groundwork. Well, let's start ahead before we get to this game. This is a top 10 matchup for Florida State. They really, under Jimbo Fisher, they had done well. I don't know if they really had a signature win. They definitely had not beaten a top 10 team before that. And even going back to the season before, 2011, probably a little bit disappointing. I think they finished 9-4 that year, so there was a lot of expectations coming into 2012.
There were, and then, the fan base was not ecstatic with Jimbo. And actually, as we go through that season, they got less ecstatic. Even after this game, this big-time game from him, a big-time win, there were a couple losses later in the year which kind of stuck in their craw. But, Jimbo's 2010 season was such a success. They won 10 games, even with Ponder going down a couple times. EJ Manuel came in and beat Clemson that year at home. Well, Dustin Hopkins with the 55-yarder beat Clemson. But then the next year they were preseason top 10, and they had that 3-game losing streak, right? So that was a bummer. They won 7 of their last 8 after that, but still it kind of left you hollow. Like the win over Florida was great. It was at Florida. The defense played great, but the offense had 80 yards of offense. So fast forward to 2012, and you're hoping things are better, but Jimbo doesn't have a signature win yet because that was not a good Florida team in 11, not really a good Miami team, either one of those 2 years that he ended up beating. I'd say South Carolina was probably his best win up to that point, and that was a 4-loss South Carolina team with a drunk quarterback. So then you go to 2012, and I just looked at the schedule because I completely forgot that they start with 2 FBS schools. They start with Murray State and Savannah State. Now, Savannah State might be the worst team that's ever stepped foot in Doak Campbell Stadium, and that includes teams that played, the FSU team that went to the Cigar Bowl in the 50s. Like, it was just an awful football team. Florida State learned nothing about itself from that game, or the Murray State game for that matter. And I think they even called that Savannah State game in the third quarter because the rain and the lightning, they're just like, look, it's bad enough, it's done. So then they beat Wake Forest, still nothing to really write home about. And so you go into that Clemson game, you're thinking, okay, they're averaging 60 points a game, but they've done it against nobody, no real defenses. What are they going to do against Clemson? This is a huge game. It's a huge game for Mark Stoops because that was the biggest challenge his defense was going to face all season, that Clemson offense. And it just set the stage. Florida State, I think, was 4th or 5th in the country at the time. Clemson was top 10. It was an enormous game. And you hope that they learned their lesson from the last time they played a huge game at Doak, which was the year before against Oklahoma, where they lost that game. So, and the offense wasn't good at all. And that was not a great Oklahoma defense, but the offense just was not very good. So you hope they learned their lesson going into 2012. That's what I remember when you think about the landscape, is how is this team going to handle this stage?
In the backdrop of that, I guess you're like, what was the signature win? You mentioned the South Carolina game. You got a little excited. I think that was it was an SEC team. It was the first year for Jimbo. Like in hindsight, it was a good win, but it wasn't a great win. I think the year before, maybe a little bit better win, maybe for EJ, and I want to ask him this. And by the way, we will be joined by EJ Manuel here at ACC Network, who was the quarterback who led Florida State to over 600 yards of offense in this game, the offense was just ridiculous, especially in the second half. He had that game against Notre Dame in the bowl game the year before, and that was the one, if everybody remembers, they started 4 freshman offensive linemen in that game. They were just getting pummeled in the first half. I think, EJ, I'll ask him about this. I think he played with a broken leg for part of that game and rallied them, hit Rashad Green, and that was kind of that was a top, not a great Notre Dame team, but a top 20 team that you fell behind on in your young offensive line. Maybe that kind of build the building blocks for this, but really I think EJ was still looking for that kind of signature win against a top 10 team. He really hadn't had one to this point.
At all. And, Taj Boyd was the bigger name coming into that game. Taj Boyd had DeAndre Hopkins and Sammy Watkins were his wide receivers. I mean, it was a loaded offense. And, yeah, when you look at that game, it kind of started out how, like I thought it would start out. The defense struggled. I think Clemson scored on their first drive, maybe their first or second play. They hit a long bomb. So they're up 7-0. Yep. Florida State goes right back down the field and scores to make it 7-7. Clemson goes back down the field and scores again. Florida State goes back down the field and scores again. It's like, okay, is this going to be a 60-58? Is it going to be Baylor, West Virginia? And then Florida State hit a little bit of a lull at the end of the half, and Clemson didn't. And at halftime, I think the score was 21-14 at half. Yes. Is that right, Dean?
Yeah.
And then Clemson goes on to make it 28-14 early on in the third quarter. And you're like, yep, there it is. There's the wrap. This is another Jimbo team that has all the talent, and we knew it was talented. Maybe we didn't know exactly how talented it was, but we knew it was really talented. That on the big stage, they just can't get stops. A very talented. That's one of the best defenses in school history. That 2012 unit, and Clemson's rolling through them, and then the offense is kind of sputtering. And we'll ask EJ about this play, but I think one of the biggest plays of that game, I don't know if you remember it, Gene, is this wasn't the Kelvin Benjamin of 2013 either. He was a nice player in 12, but he wasn't sensational. He was still a little too heavy. And they run like it's almost like a reverse, but it's like a shovel pass to him coming around in front of EJ. And he ends up taking it like 65 yards down to the 5. and then they are down to the 10, and then they go in to score to make it 28-21. And I think that changed the whole momentum of the game. They needed somebody to make a play. And not only did Kelvin make the play, but the blocking was perfect. He shook off some tacklers, and he went 60 yards, and all of a sudden you're right back in the game again. And from there on, Florida State dominated the game. But that, for the first 2 quarters and 5 minutes, you're like, yep, Florida State can't handle this stage. And I wonder if that permeated the team at all. Like, are we ever going to win one of these games? Are we ever going to win one of these? And they did. That was the one that the 2012 team could really hang its hat on, because that was a great win, because that was a very good Clemson team.
Well, that's a good point. Something I do want to ask EJ about. What is your thinking on the sideline? Because you guys hadn't really had that signature win. You're down 14 points. Everything's going against you. What's crazy, if you go back and I pulled up the stats from that game, I didn't even realize this. You realize Clemson had 0 penalties at halftime. They had 0 drops, 0 turnovers. They had pulled 2 or 3 trick plays that had worked. So, yeah. I mean, it was really everything was going their way absolutely perfectly in that game. And as soon as, I think the defense, it's credible. You look at the second half, we'll talk about this. After all of a sudden, it's like somebody just turned a faucet off. Clemson was moving the ball up and down the field at will. Then all of a sudden, it's 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out turnover. Meanwhile, EJ's directing touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. So the switch just flipped crazy right there early in the third quarter.
I feel like it was 4 or 5 3 and outs in a row that the Florida State defense got. And then Clemson got bailed out of one late in the fourth quarter when it's still a game. Clemson, I think Florida State has a sack that would have ended a drive, but they call Florida State for a penalty. And then on the very next play, my man Nick Wasom intercepts a pass. Biggest play he ever made at Florida State. He was a good quarterback too. He just kind of got overtaken by Darby and PJ Williams the next year. But Wasom making that play, and then Chris Thompson, and that's another person we'll ask EJ about, is Chris Thompson was so good in that game and so good that season before he got hurt. He was electric. He was Warwick Dunn, Dalvin Cook level electric in the early part of the 2012 season. And so he puts it away with a long touchdown run. And also, that was the first year Brent Venables was at Clemson. And Florida State had played him the last 2 years when he was at Oklahoma. So I want to ask EJ about that too. Like, obviously he didn't have quite the talent level at Clemson that year that he would go on to have, or what that he had at Clemson. But if they knew if there was anything they could, obviously they had to learn some things, some tendencies from having played him the 2 previous years, how much maybe that helped going into that game, knowing the defensive coordinator so well.
Yeah, it's we're going to bring on EJ here in a minute, but still it strikes me when you look at this. I mean, you talk about Chris Thompson. You got James Wilder, who had a crazy run in this game. He had about 5 or 6 guys bounce off him in a long run in the second half too. That's another one that kind of broke the will, I think, of the Clemson defense. We needed that against him. He had Lonnie Pryor in his prime, he was an unknown blocker. He could do a lot with the ball in his hands. He had a Devonta Freeman on this team. It's amazing to me when I see this. They put up 49 points, well over 600 yards of offense. I still do not understand to this day how they only scored 16 points, this offense, at NC State a few weeks later. And that effectively cost them the season.
Gee, this is supposed to be a pick-me-up. This is supposed to be a feel-good.
A
feel-good war chat.
I can't shake the memory of that game out of my head.
It would be funny if we just asked EJ only about the NC State game. EJ, what happened, man? You're up 16 and a half and then nothing? That was what was so, until the 13 season, that was what was so befuddling about this team and that offense, is it could look unbelievable one week, and then the next week really struggle to find any kind of rhythm. Now, they would obviously put up some points and some yards, but they would go from looking like the best offense in the United States to looking like a middling ACC offense. And it would go but then obviously 2013 happened. But that 2012 was, I think, that the 2012 Clemson game was the ceiling for that team offensively. That was as good as they played all year. Even the rest of the year, Northern Illinois, they put up 31. Florida, they struggled a lot, obviously the NC State game. But against that defense, and Clemson wasn't a great defense by any stretch of the imagination in 2012, but they had a great defensive coordinator and they had some talent. So to put up 50 points on them really was a pretty remarkable. And I think Dustin Hopkins missed a couple field goals in that game too. They could have 55 points. And then the next year they put up 51 on them. And then Clemson figured things out defensively. They started getting a little more Jimmies and Joes. But that year specifically, I think you could say, that was a huge win in the sense that it paved the way for the ACC championship. And when you talk to Jimbo, he always talked about how important beating Georgia Tech was in that game, just for these guys to feel like champions again. It wasn't a great ACC that year, but they won every game but one that they played in the conference, and they won the ACC. And that was a really big accomplishment for that team and for those players, so many of which, not EJ, but so many of which came back the next year and had a bigger goal. And they knew they were good. They knew they were talented. And then they got one of the all-time great quarterback seasons in college football history. But I think 2012, if they don't win the Clemson game, they don't win the ACC. So do they have maybe the championship pedigree? You can roll your eyes at it, but it meant a lot to Jimbo. It really did. He said it right after the fact. These guys were wearing their ACC championships around the building. They were showing off everything that they had won. They felt good about themselves. For the first time, the program felt good about itself for the first time in 7 years. And so it was a nice accomplishment for that team, and I think it did set the stage for what they did the next year.
Yeah, good stuff. A lot of stuff we can ask EJ about that, kind of setting the stage for the ACC championship, like you pointed out, and what the mentality of the team was at that point. All right, here we're gonna break away a little bit here, and we come back. We're gonna be joined by the quarterback from this famous game, and that's EJ Manuel, who's currently with the ACC Network. And in the house with us, and hopefully you can see him, is former Florida State quarterback, great, and of course analyst for ACC Network, and that is EJ Manuel. Coming from the West Coast. How you doing, AJ?
I'm doing great, man. Just, obviously, like we were just saying, things considered with what's going on with COVID-19. Doing okay. My family's all healthy, so that's all I can ask for right now.
You somehow look younger now than you did when you were a quarterback at Florida State.
You know what? I think that's a testament of not having as much stress when I was playing. So stress and sunshine out here in California, man, it's been pretty good to me. So I'm blessed, man. I'm definitely blessed and grateful.
And we're talking about that 2012 Clemson game, which was, I think, your best game. It was an all-time great performance by a Florida State quarterback. Mm-hmm. And me and Gene beforehand were talking about, I guess, the pressure that was on that team that year, because the year before you had been ranked high, and you had had a big game early in the season against Oklahoma. And I know you got hurt, but you guys didn't live up. You didn't do what you wanted to do, and it started a bit of a losing streak.
Right.
How were you feeling pressure your senior year, number 4 in the country? How much pressure were you, EJ Manuel, feeling going into that huge 8 p.m. primetime college game day is here showdown with Clemson?
Yeah, I mean, it was an opportunity, for me specifically to just show the country, my team, obviously the state of Florida, the fans in Tallahassee, what kind of legacy I wanted to leave behind. And, the only way to really do that is in big moments. And that was a huge moment playing Clemson. They had a really good team. Taj Boyd, who's also a Virginia native, known him since middle school. He was their quarterback. Sammy Watkins, DeAndre Hopkins, Andre Ellington. They had a bunch of first rounders and second rounders on that team, offensively and defensively. And, we went out there and we just wanted to make a statement. And for me, I just always felt like I tried to show up when the lights were biggest. Even in moments when I was a freshman at Florida State and Ponder would get hurt, I'd have to go in and play in a bowl game, or like Bobby Bowden's last game, the Gator Bowl. He went out there and played well. And again, like I wasn't necessarily the quarterback I wish I was at that time, because I was 18 years old. You know what I mean? I had to grow, but at the same time, I went out there and was able to find ways to make plays and win the game. So the same with that Clemson game. It just so happened that we had a really good team as well. And I had a ton of weapons with me. And the funny thing is, those guys were babies at the time too. All the guys that won the championship the following year, they were sophomores and freshmen my senior year. And so, it was just really cool to kind of get that trend going back in Tallahassee. And, at that time, we were the big dogs in ACC.
Now, EJ, the year before, interestingly, you guys went up against Brent Venables, and now all of a sudden he moves over to Clemson, and you're going against him with a different team. But I mean, having that film really from the 2 years before you guys played him, I mean, having that film, did that give you a little bit of an edge, or at least you kind of knew what you were getting to against his defensive scheme?
A little bit. I think back then, I wasn't a full-time starter. Also, I don't think we had the firepower that we had defensively at the time when we played them my senior year. But going back to that sophomore season, I think that was when Dustin kicked the game-winning field goal from like 50 or something like that. And I had to play, and Ponder was hurt. And I remember we really ran like the sprint option a bunch, and we had a couple big throws down the field. Jimbo allowed me to throw some shots. But back then, I mean, that was a confidence builder for me. So in my mind, since I'd already beaten them my sophomore year, I felt like I could definitely do it my senior year. Even then, when I was older, I was bigger, I was stronger, and I had an even better team talent-wise around me at the time. So it definitely gave me all the confidence I needed.
But that 2012 Clemson team was the Brent Venables. That was his first year as the coordinator there. He had been at Oklahoma the year before.
Oh, is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Got
yeah,
it. Okay,
yeah.
I
Take
didn't even
anything
realize
from
that.
that Oklahoma game?
Nah, not really. To be real, I don't even. I just found that out. I didn't know that he was the DC. Yeah, it's funny. I just realized that. And I'm sure Jimbo might have said that back in the day, but that's literally like 10 years ago, or more than that. But yeah, I guess with that being said, sure, I'm sure Jimbo definitely saw some similarities as far as what he did at Oklahoma and what he brought over to Clemson.
So people, obviously Clemson now is different even than it was back then. That was right when the Dabo train was starting.
Yep.
And I think I think they won the ACC the year before, but even with a couple of losses, their defense wasn't great.
Right.
Then, not like it is now anyway. What do you remember watching them on film during the week? Because you guys hadn't played, you'd played like Murray State and Savannah State, and then I think Wake Forest, you beat the bejesus out of them. But when you watch Clemson that week, did you see a lot of like, okay, we should be able to live here. We should be able to make some plays here. Could you see some weaknesses on that defense going into the game?
Yeah, I think their linebacking core was where we saw some mismatches with our running backs like James Wilder and Devontae Freeman, Lonnie Pryor, Chris Thompson, the way he was able to catch the ball out the backfield. So we saw a huge mismatch there. And then, even at DB, we felt like our receivers going up against their DBs had a better shot of winning those 50-50 balls. I remember I threw a fade to the back corner end zone to Rodney Smith in that game. And KB had a big, I think I tossed him like a sprint sweep or something like that. And he took that for like 60. Kenny Shaw had some big plays. Rashad Green had big plays. So everybody showed up that game. And, we knew offensively we had to score a lot of points. I mean, Clemson had a high-powered offense. Taj was throwing the ball all over the place. He had really 3 first-rounders at receiver. Martavis Bryant was a receiver there too, including Sammy and Nuke. So we knew we were going to score points.
Adam Humphries, right? Wasn't he on
Humphries,
that team?
They had a good team, man. So it's funny, if they would have played back that game right now, I would say at least 45 pros were on that field at one time, offensively and defensively, between the two of us. So we knew offensively, though, we had to put up points, and we knew we couldn't turn the ball over.
Now, EJ, I want to get into here in a minute, just kind of going through the game script, what was going on, the back and forth. But, I mean, when you look at just at the end of the day, you threw for 380 yards. You ran for over 100. I didn't see too many 100-yard rushing games for you. So you had almost 500 total yards of offense.
Yeah.
I mean, you had some other great games at Florida State, and maybe it wasn't as pretty, but I know the year before, obviously coming in that bowl game and rallying Florida State against Notre Dame had to be pretty sweet for you too. But is this a game, looking back in your career, that you said this is the one you just hit on all cylinders?
Oh, yeah, especially now that I'm with the ACC network. I mean, this is something I give Eric McLean jabs all the time, and even when I see Coach Sweeney, who's also a great guy, by the way, I got to give him props. He's a terrific dude, man, not just a football coach, but his personality is awesome. So for me, just knowing that I was able to lead a team that won those games versus that caliber of an opponent, I just always had that respect from those guys, and that was really important to me. And, looking back on it now, I guess 10 years ago, or I guess that game was 10 years ago. I'm sorry, 8 years ago. It's just really special. And, it's one of those things that, when I do see those guys, because, at the end of the day, fellas, like, it's sports, it's still a kid's game, and there's bragging rights. And when you have those bragging rights for pretty much the rest of your life, when you go out and almost put up 500 points on the Clemson football team, no matter what people want to say, oh, they're not as good as they once were. I mean, they were still a top 10 ranked team at the time. I mean, they were a loaded football team, and we went out there and played well, and I had statistically one of my best games. So it's definitely something that I still would tell my grandkids about in the future.
So getting into the game, you said you thought you were going to have to score a lot of points. Well, I'm pretty sure, Gene, correct me if I'm wrong, Clemson scored in like a minute and a half.
Yeah,
I think they hit Sammy.
Play. Yeah, Sammy Watkins, a 60-yard bomb right to start the first drive.
So you see that, and you know how good that especially how good that defense ended up becoming, the 2012 Florida State defense. Yep. But Clemson had its way with them for the first half. Mm-hmm. So are you saying as a quarterback, man, we got to match these guys drive? And you did the first couple. They scored, you scored. They scored, you scored. But when the defense is struggling like that, do you feel a little more pressure? Like, man, we got to go out there and put some points on the board, or this could get away from us.
Yeah, I'm sure back then, Chris, I definitely saw this pressure. But looking back on it now, I'm 30 and I'm obviously years removed from that game. I just think I was just living in the moment, man, and just doing my job and, doing what Jimbo had coached us up to do. That's why I chose to go to Florida State. I felt like Jimbo would help me be the best quarterback that I could be and give me an opportunity to have a career in the NFL, which I did. So I guess as far as it being pressure, I don't really think I saw it as pressure. I think I more just saw it as like, hey, this is the game. And, there's 60 minutes, and instead of just looking at Clemson and kind of being in awe of their offense, I mean, I got a pretty good offense on my side too, so let's go out here and execute and do our job and help our defense out.
Now, EJ, in that first when you guys answered that quick touchdown by Clemson on the first drive, you drove them down 85 yards, tied up 7-7. I think you had a 25-yard run during that first series. Did that just kind of come that you were going to be able to run the football so well against them, or did that just kind of happen in the moment?
I think it happened in the moment, truthfully. We knew that I could throw against them because, like I said, we felt like our receivers had a bit of an advantage over their DBs. But I guess the rushing lanes just opened up. And, our offense that year, and I'm sure you could say the 2013 season with Jameis, I mean, we had so many weapons at the skill positions. I mean, are you going to stop the run? If you stop the run, we're just going to throw the ball on you. If you try to play coverage, we're just going to run the ball with these great running backs we have. I mean, legitimately have 4 running backs that all could go yard. I mean, you throw in Carlos Williams too. I think he was playing offense a little bit at the time. So we just had so many options, and I think it posed a threat to that defense that, hey, okay, and now we're adding EJ running the ball too. Because I think some of the runs I had were just me catching it and just running the sweep to the right or to the left with a bunch of lead blockers. So, it just opened up, and Jimbo had a great scheme for Coach Venables that day.
Do you remember, EJ, so you guys go into the locker room trailing 21-14. I think Dustin even missed 2 kicks that half, which never really happened with him.
Right.
What the feeling is like in the locker room? Because, again, we had just talked about it. You had a situation like this the year before on the huge stage at home, packed house, loud house, and you lost the game. And now you're down at half again. And your defense isn't really playing well. And then I think Clemson goes out immediately and scores another touchdown to go up by 2 touchdowns. What's the vibe in the locker room at halftime? What's the vibe even on the sidelines when you get down by 2 touchdowns?
Yeah,
Is there any thought of, man, we can't do this again. We can't have this huge game and lose another home game when we're trying to build this program back?
I think for that team we were really player driven. I know myself, I would speak up. Telvin Smith would speak up. Lamarcus Joyner would speak up. Xavier, Lonnie, guys on offense too, Cam Irvin. So we had so many guys that were alpha dogs on that team. We weren't really pressed as far as in the locker room. We just knew, hey, they've shown us the best that they have, and we felt like we hadn't even gotten to half of what we could do offensively and defensively. So offensively, we said, hey, defense, if y'all give us more chances, we'll put up some points, and that's what happened in the second half.
Now, EJ, at that point, when you're down, Corey just brought that up, you're down 2 touchdowns early in the third quarter. Now, if you realize at that point, Clemson doesn't have a single penalty against them. They don't have a drop pass. There's no turnovers. They pulled 2 trick plays on you guys at that point. But, I mean, you had to feel like, okay, they've given it their best shot at that point. If we get click and stop turning the ball over, stop making penalties, we're going to click. And at that point, you went on a crazy run, something like 4 straight touchdown drives. I mean, what was it at that point to click? And did things just mesh together, or what happened there?
Yeah, I would say the play calling that Jimbo started seeing, I guess Jimbo probably had a better idea what they were doing defensively. So he said, hey, look, there's a few things that we could take advantage of. Obviously, them trying to press up Rodney Smith, that was a size advantage. I forgot who the corner was on him, but, I know he wasn't anywhere near Rodney's size. Rodney was 6'3", 6'4", and could take off and run. So I remember that touchdown specifically. And then I want to say it was a play action touchdown pass that I threw to Rashad Green, kind of like a dump pass down in the red zone too. So that was the biggest thing, just taking advantage of, field position. And, situationally, we knew we were going to have to score points in order to kind of give our defense, and not even score points, just move the chains. We couldn't go 3 and out or 5 plays and then give it back to their offense because our defense needed a chance to get a break.
You mentioned it on the little, I guess it was like a little shovel pass to Kelvin.
Look, yeah, it was like a shovel pass, yep.
Kelvin in 2012 wasn't Kelvin of 2013. He still had a little bit of weight on him. He didn't have that explosiveness. It was almost like a shovel pass to a tight end.
Right.
But that might have been the play of the game because at that point you were down 2 touchdowns. And that was the crowd was kind of getting restless. And then he busted all the way down to the 10. I guess number one, my first question is, do you ever wonder yourself, man, Kelvin, you couldn't have gotten in shape for my senior year? Like what that offense would have been with that Kelvin Benjamin. But then also just how big that play was. And when he got going, even at that weight, how kind of rare that kind of size and speed was.
Yeah, it's funny, when you bring that up, Corey, it's actually funny because I bet that play, and if you ask KB that play probably is what ignited him and said, look, man, I could really be a dude, not just in college, but also in the NFL. And obviously he ended up being the first-round pick. But yeah, I mean, it definitely gave us a breather because it wasn't, that was easy for me. I just caught the ball and just tossed it to him and allowed him to let his athletic ability get us down to, to the 10-yard line. And then I think the next play, or maybe the play after that, was a dump pass off of play action to Rashad on the left side of the end zone. So, like I said, man, a combination of all those different plays and just, again, you got to take your hat off to Jimbo for the play calling because to think of KB 6'6", 245 pounds, on a jet sweep, I'm pretty sure Clemson wasn't expecting that. You know what I mean? And so once they saw him in motion and saw he had the ball and then he had a head of steam ahead of him, kind of hard to take down. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So I'm sure the 2013 KB would have taken it to the house instead of just, letting it be a 60-yard game. So I appreciate him letting me get that touchdown pass.
You might have won the Heisman if you had 2013 KB.
Dude, who you telling, man? Seriously. Yeah. But you think about it, too. I mean, Rashad Green was a year older. Nick O'Leary was a year older. That offensive line all came back. Kenny Shaw, James Wilder, Carlos Williams, Vontae. Like, there's so many good players, man. It's always fun to talk to those guys and just say, like, man, if we knew who we were back then in college, we were just working hard. You know what I mean? But if we knew who we really were, we should have won the national championship without a doubt.
So, EJ, you guys go from being down 28-14 early in that quarter, third quarter, to up 35-31 in like 11 minutes. I mean, that's just against a really good team. I mean, that's unbelievable. I know you mentioned that the play to Kelvin, but I also throw out the next series gets started by another guy who was also pretty good in 2013, and that's LaMarcus Joyner. It gives you that 90 kick return. At that point, is that kind of when you have the moment you can feel it in the stands, you can feel in the silence, just that momentum ball is rolling and no one's going to stop it?
Yeah, I mean, what we have to remember, too, is football is a team game. So, of course, the quarterback or the middle linebacker, whoever is considered the leader on offense and defense, they get a lot of the blame. But, when we have great talent like LaMarcus, guys that can get us in great field position and really not even the field position, just the momentum. He got all of our fans back on our side, which makes it even harder for the Clemson offense to operate. So I actually do remember, Joyner doing that, and it gave us a short field offensively, and we were able to cap it off with a touchdown.
And then the defense gets a stop, and then you go down and finally take the lead for the first time all night. And I'm almost positive Chris Thompson had a touchdown run that was called back.
True.
I think he had a great touchdown run that was called back. And on the very next play, you threw the beautiful fade to Rodney Smith in the end zone. Do you remember the play call? Do you remember seeing that match? Is that the first read? Is that the only read? What are you thinking before you throw it to 84 right there?
Yeah, I think once I saw that the middle of the field safety stayed in the middle, he didn't come off the hash. And then once I saw they had press coverage on Rodney, in the huddle, more or less we had a communication between each other. Say, hey, if they try to press you, go ahead, fade them up and take off. And that's what happened. And Rodney had a great release. He stacked the DB, kept him on his back shoulder, and put the ball out there for his hands to just go out and reach up and grab it. So, again, man, it was just, that night, I felt like we all grew up as not just players, but as a program. I felt like that was where we were like, look, man, like, if we're going to take this step and just take over the ACC, the time is now. And I think that's where FSU has to get back to even currently. Just you got to have that mentality of saying, hey, look, I'm not going to wait for tomorrow or the next day because it's not promised. If you have an opportunity to make a name for yourself, I just felt like we took advantage of it that night.
Now, EJ, going to the fourth quarter here, and I think I want to get your opinion if this was the knockout punch. You guys are up. James Wilder has that run where I think every defender on Clemson got a shot at him. He took 5 guys to take him down. A couple plays later, you guys score, go up 42-31. Was that in your mind? Was that the knockout punch? Just when a back like that just demoralizes a defense?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, it was a statement. Just plays like that where we're just kind of showing our dominance, and just letting them know, like, look, we've got the lead and we're not going to give it back to you. You know what I mean? And football is one of those special games where you can't really do that. You have that momentum swing of just, making big plays and, Wilder obviously capping it off with that huge run and him doing and that was the thing, like Wilder was like our third running back. I mean, he was after Chris Thompson and Devontae. So you imagine your third guy still coming in and plugging away. And I'm sure by that time, Clemson's defense was tired. You know what I mean? So you see this 240-pound running back come in that can run a 4.4, 4.5. You know what I mean? It's like, all right, well, we got a long night ahead of us. And I think that did kind of put the nail in the coffin, for that Clemson football team.
And you talk about being a team game, which it obviously is. Well, the offense was great the whole second half. Well, the defense was too. Like after that first touchdown, the defense really found itself. I think it was like 4 or 5 straight 3-and-outs where you guys were hot and you kept getting the ball back. And then my man Nick Wasom has an interception, gives you guys the ball. And I feel like it was the first or second play, Chris Thompson, who, by the way, I want you to talk about. Chris Thompson takes it 37, 38 yards to really put the game away. So it was symbiotic in the sense that, the defense struggled early and the offense kept you guys in it. Then the defense started getting stops, and that turned it into you guys were up by 18 points with 3 minutes to go. Right. I guess first off, talk about how good that defense was, and it figured it out. It was well coached with a lot of really good players. They were a little bit young, but really good. And then Chris Thompson and what he meant to that team, how fun he was to watch that year before he got hurt.
Yeah. Well, first, that defense, I mean, we went up against them every day in practice. So we always felt like our offense, if we could, go out and do well against them in a scrimmage or even move the ball, get first downs or score touchdowns, we knew we could take care of whoever we were playing on Saturdays. So that gave us a load of confidence to have those guys on our side. And then you just talk about Chris Thompson. It's funny. I feel like Chris doesn't get the recognition he deserves, man. I think he was much better than people give him credit for. And obviously, he's still having a great NFL career. But in college, he was an electric running back. Anytime he touched the ball, he could go 99 yards. And so Chris was one of those guys. And also, Chris pass blocked. A lot of people don't give him credit for that, too. He was a great running back. And the reason he probably played in front of Vontae at that time was because his pass blocking experience was really good. And he knew where to go and pass protection. Not to say Vontae didn't, but I felt like Chris kind of held down his position and, really showed who he was going to be. So like I said, he was a home run threat. He was a guy that could run between the tackles. He could run power, even though he was a smaller stature running back. He was tough and durable enough to still do the things that we asked him to do. And coming off those injuries, it's pretty amazing to say that he's still doing that at a high level in the NFL too.
And that's how good Chris Thompson was that I don't even know if Devontae Freeman got a carry in that game.
I can't remember.
It was Chris Thompson, Lonnie Pryor, and James Wilder.
And James,
But that's how good Chris Thompson was that Devontae Freeman, a future All-Pro, was like, hey, man, you can't get on the field because number 4 was so good.
Exactly. And that's when you have a great program too, Corey. It's just to have that, that was honestly just some of the best moments. And again, as when I was in it, we didn't really see ourselves as, that type of class. We knew we were good. We knew we were good players, but nobody knew who was going to get drafted where and go on to play in the NFL and things like that, which kind of solidifies that class. But I mean, when you look at the names and, if you go back and look at that roster and that depth chart, I'm telling you, they're pros all over offensively and defensively and special teams. You know what I mean? So it was just such a joyous time. And again, it actually brings me back to a lot of those moments in Tallahassee of playing and winning those big games like that. And, I will say Doak was probably the loudest versus that Oklahoma team at home, but that Clemson game was probably a runner-up to that as far as how loud it was that night.
Oh, it was electric, man.
Yeah, it was awesome.
EJ, offense finishes with 667 total yards. You're nearly 500 by yourself between your running and passing. The third quarter, the middle of the fourth quarter, you guys scored touchdowns on 5 of 6 drives. The only one you didn't score, you drove it in the red zone. I think it was a bad snap by Brian Stork, which you never saw either. He never did that. So I mean, you guys were rolling, and it was just you couldn't be stopped that night. I mean, I at least during that era, I don't think I've seen an offense until we got to the next year. But you had to see the writing on the wall, and you also saw a little bit, I'm sure, Jameis in practice that year. You kind of saw the writing on the wall at that point, didn't you? Yeah,
I mean, it was obvious. I felt like once we had kind of set the table and that next wave of the 2013 guys kind of came in. Because, again, I said all those guys were a year older, and even Jameis was a year older. He was a true freshman my senior year, so he got a chance to sit and learn the offense and have that rapport with Jimbo. Obviously get his body stronger and his mind stronger. And, I definitely felt like he was able to watch us be leaders in that locker room. Not to say he was already a leader. Jameis has always been an alpha guy anyways. But I think the way that we spoke to our team, they just carried that legacy on. And then you saw guys like Timmy Jernigan jumping in, LaMarcus Joyner would jump in, guys who necessarily wouldn't always speak up and stand up in front of the team. You just saw it in that 2013 season. And I was in Buffalo watching it. And it was just it just made me even more proud to say, man, I left Florida State football program in a better situation than when I got there in 2008. You know what I mean? So, and I'm not saying I did that by myself. I did that with a bunch of other great players. But that was something I'm very proud of to this day.
Jimbo always talked about, even December after you guys beat Georgia Tech that year to win the ACC, how guys were walking around with their ACC championship hats. You guys had never won a championship since you had been at Florida State. And it kind of gave you that taste of what it was. How important, and I know it's basically you're speculating, but how important do you think winning the ACC was going into that next year, giving these guys, the guys that stayed, the feeling of being a champion and seeing what it takes and how you can't let up? like you maybe did it against a half against NC State, and how you have to just dominate teams when you get a chance to, and maybe the lessons learned from 2012 and the good feelings of going, it's the first 12-win season in 15 years at Florida State.
Yeah, it's funny. That game was on the ACC network last night. I want to say it was NC State's takeover, and my dad was watching it. And of course, I didn't watch it because I can't stomach it anymore. But it definitely taught us all, not just myself, but even the younger guys, when you have an opponent down, you got to keep them down. You know what I mean? And if you get a chance to kill a fly and you have a sledgehammer, go ahead and just take the sledgehammer and just knock it out. Because if you let a team stay in a game with you, that's what happens. They came back and they were able to find a way to win. I think in the second half versus NC State 2012 year, we didn't score in the second half. Right? I might have had an interception or something like that happen and gave them an opportunity to come back and win, which is what they did. So, I felt like 2012 was a perfect setup for the 13 season as far as them seeing the good and the bad and the things to learn from. And obviously it showed up because they went out next year and beat Auburn in the national championship game. And I was there for that in Pasadena. So, although I wish I had a championship ring myself, national championship ring, I won 4 bowl games, which is great, but I didn't win that big one. It's still cool to have that sense of pride, knowing that I was, kind of helped lay some groundwork for that for the following year.
EJ, my last question to you, going back to that Clemson game, we all see Jimbo when maybe you make a mistake. We've seen that 1,000 times where he's yelling at you as you're walking off the field. What is he like when you're having that kind of game, like an incredible game where you're really making no mistakes at all? Is he still the same dude, or is he like, EJ, man, you're playing great? Oh my God.
He's still exactly right. He's still the same dude, though. That's the thing. Like, that's what he expects, though. You know what I mean? Right. It wasn't like he was shocked or surprised. And granted, I didn't do that every night. I wasn't putting up almost 400 yards passing, 100 yards rushing. That would have been cool. But I definitely that night showed up in a game when I had to. And, Jimbo was just kind of looking me in the eye like he always did. Say, hey, keep going. Keep your foot on the neck. And that was the way he taught me. That's the way he taught all his quarterbacks. And it is a happier Monday of a film session when you go out and play well versus not playing well on Saturday. But I will say I definitely missed Jimbo once I went to the NFL because he kept us so locked in mentally. He just, even though he was a hard coach, that is what gave you the confidence to go out and play well on Saturdays. You know what I mean? Because you were put through so much stress Monday through Friday as far as walkthroughs and practice and third down drills, 2-minute drills, that when you got into the game Saturday, that was the easy part. So hearing fans boo and all this kind of stuff as far as an opposing team's fans, that never bothered us because our internal clock in our mind was already worried about Jimbo. You know what I mean? We wanted to perform so we didn't get chewed out. And so having that sense of urgency, I definitely kind of missed that when I got into the NFL just because I had, that type of rearing up and that backing behind me.
Jameis only had to deal with Jimbo for like 3 years too, man. 2.5.
Exactly.
You had to deal with him for 5.
And look, I think Jimbo got nicer once I left too, man, from what I heard. So I think Jimbo actually started. Yeah, exactly. He stopped chewing guys out as much, but also he knew what he had. Jimbo didn't. Right. Jimbo knew he didn't have to do that anymore because the groundwork was laid. Like I said, Jimbo saw that he had a team that was accountable. He had a team that was player driven. The guys would speak up and kind of call each other out. Somebody wasn't showing up to class, guys would call him out. And Jimbo knew he didn't have to chew out anybody anymore. So it's funny, like there's a method to his madness. And I know you have heard players say he's such a hard coach and this and that, but I appreciate it for him. I appreciate him for that. And I actually saw him at the national championship game in New Orleans and gave him a big hug. I love that guy. I mean, he literally helped me achieve my dream, which would be a first-round draft pick quarterback. And I'll forever be grateful for him.
EJ, last thing from me, and we'll let you go. And thank you, first of all, for being so generous with your time today. It's really appreciated. And I think this gives
Gene, I have nothing else going on, bro, besides staying in the house, so it's all good.
We're going to run through the whole season after this.
Right. I'm like, I don't remember that one, but sounds good.
Let's do it. Hey, before we got it, I went back and watched the YouTube replay of this game just to refresh my memory. I don't know if you remember this. There was a cut-in in the second half where they had you in a little FSU studio, and you said you wanted to someday be in the studio. You someday wanted to be next to Musburger and Herb Street and get into broadcast journalism. And it's just interesting that I saw that right before you're actually in it now, the ACC network. But I vaguely remember back talking to you back around that at some point during this, and I think you said that initially you were in a different major, and it was T-Buck, Terrell Buckley, that kind of like guided you to convince you to maybe switch to get more into communications to do along this line. And since then, have you talked to T-Buck about that?
Dude, it's funny you brought that up, Gene. So there's like 2 other times where I'm caught on tape saying this is what I wanted to do as far as get into media. once I finished my playing career. And I haven't spoken to T-Buck. I actually need to reach out to him and just say thank you, because at the time I want to say I was doing biomedical engineering, took chemistry one my freshman year. I said, okay, never mind. I'm not doing engineering. That's too much time, and it'll take away from my football career. And then I want to say maybe like sociology or something kind of bland, right? No offense to the sociology majors out there, but I knew I could do something better. And T-Buck was saying, hey, man, FSU has one of the best broadcasting and communication schools. And I looked into it, got into the School of Communications there and got my degree in that. And it's funny now that when I was presented the opportunity to, stop playing and work for the ACC network, I took it. And, it's one of those things where these jobs don't just come every day to guys. And, you kind of have to be at the right place at the right time, know the right people. And, when the opportunity presented itself, I took it. I was under contract with Kansas City Chiefs, who obviously won the Super Bowl this year. And I would have been fighting for that backup job. But, I just also came off a third knee injury. So that was probably the biggest reason why I was like, okay, now it's time to go ahead and move forward and do something else. So I got 6 seasons in the NFL. It was a lot of fun. But I'm really enjoying doing what I'm doing now. That's probably why I don't seem that stressed, even though I do need a haircut. But life is a little more even keel nowadays, and it's a ton of fun.
You're really good at it, by the way. I feel like you're kind of a natural at it. I know you put in work, but you're just kind of a natural in front of the camera. You're obviously very intelligent. Is this what you want to do, though? Or do you want to be an analyst like a Tony Romo in the calling games?
Yeah, it's funny. Thank you, Corey. It's funny, though, because when I did my audition, they asked me that. They said, hey, do you want to call games or do you want to be in the studio? And truthfully, I said the studio. At the time, that's all I had experience doing. I had done a few shows on Fox Sports with Speak for Yourself and Colin Cowherd's show. So I felt comfortable doing it. It's a different ballgame, calling games versus just being in the studio, because in a game, you're calling it play by play, truthfully, and you're giving your analysis, which I could do. And actually, I was going to do it at the spring game for Florida State this year, but it got canceled. So I was looking forward to doing that with West Durham. But I'm sure eventually I would like to give it a shot. But it's funny. I got a funny quick story. So when we were with the Raiders, Coach Downing, Todd Downing was our offensive coordinator in Oakland. And he had met with Tony Romo before the game. And Tony was just kind of like telling him, like, well, hey, I noticed this on tape. I know you'd like to do this on third down. You like to do this in the red zone. Kind of had his whole scheme down. And TD was like upset because he's like, man, this dude knows all my plays. You know what I mean? And so I guess when I started getting to the broadcasting part, I was like, I know coaches don't necessarily care for it. They don't like it. You know what I mean? Obviously, nobody likes for their stuff to seem like it's very vanilla and it's easy to guess. But I know us as fans at home, we enjoy watching Tony's broadcast because he's calling it out, and it's a lot of fun. So I would like to get to that point someday. And obviously, Tony just locked in a $17 million contract, so that adds
that's where it is.
The engine. Yeah. So I'm sure one day, I'll ask my producers, Aaron Cashman, if he'll give me a shot to do it and see how it goes.
Well, great stuff, EJ, man. I appreciate you joining us. Glad to hear you're safe and that we're enjoying your work on ACC Network. And hopefully those Comcast will come to their right minds and put ACC Network on there. And there's a lot of struggling.
Yeah. What's up with that? What's going on with this, man? We got to sign a petition or something? Like, this is crazy.
Hey, I just do what I did. I switched to YouTube TV. They got you guys on there. So that's
Thank
what you
man.
do.
Appreciate it.
There's plenty of good alternatives to watch ACC Network. EJ, thanks, buddy. Look forward to seeing you soon. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, EJ.
Hey, thank you guys, too. It's great to see you guys. Stay safe. Much love to your families. And always thank you for the love that you guys showed me when I was at Florida State, and you still do now, man. So you guys take care and God bless you.
Thank you, EJ.
You too, buddy.
All right, guys. All right.
Some call them lunchtime lifesavers. Others call them the most perfect sandwiches to ever exist. At Zaxby's, we just call them our signature fan favorites. The Southern TLC Filet Sandwich has hand-breaded chicken with fresh tomato and crisp lettuce. The famous Kickin' Chicken Sandwich features spicy tongue torch and Cool Ranch sauces. And for a limited time, fried pickles are back. 2 classic sandwiches and a legendary appetizer. 3 more reasons you're gonna get a kick out of Zaxby's.